Now, Eternal Darkness was a pretty dark and scary series, and of course, you'd expect some of my more Christian friends would be kind of disturbed to see any kind of content revolving around a game like this. But actually, even in the darkest of scenery, there's always a little bit of light that will stand out. Now, in the story of Eternal Darkness, humanity is under assault from what we could best describe as these demon gods, which I mentioned earlier. And the story follows certain individuals over a course of time, not as a one individual over a course of time, but an individual will come and die in battle against the darkness, and then the story will continue maybe 50, maybe 100, maybe 200 years later, somewhere else in the timeline with another character who's fighting against the same eternal ancient evil. And I find that's a very fascinating lens to take. Now, these creatures, they have incredible power, and they operate primarily through this agent known as Pius Augustus, a former Roman centurion who was turned into a lich, effectively, who serves these entities, or at least serves one of the entities, depending on which one you chose to be the representative of your playthrough. So if you choose Uliauth, Pius would answer to Uliauth. Or if you choose Zelatath, he answers to Zelatath. And Pius Augustus serves as sort of the prime antagonist next to that respective demon god himself. So each of these various human characters fighting against the darkness are of their own note and their own character and their own quantity, and there's lots of things that you'll find fascinating about them, and some definitely more than others have a very compelling character about them or story. But one I really want to emphasize is the character Anthony. So where Anthony comes into the story revolves around a plot line that is primarily focused on the attempts of this demon god, if you were, to have killed or assassinated none other than Charlemagne the Frank, Emperor of Holy Rome. This would be around 768 to 814 AD or something like that in the timeline. Of course, Eternal Darkness is fiction, but it's a fiction that plays off of real life and weaves itself through there as a story. So Charlemagne the Frank, well, you can hear about him from the game commentary itself.
My research, it is apparent that the endeavors of mankind are mere puppetry at the hands of the ancients. Whenever a king vows reform, the ancients move quickly to stifle it. Under the auspices of Emperor Charlemagne the Frank, the new Holy Roman Empire was at the height of its power.
Hanc mit ad dominum et imperatorum nostrum, Carolum magnum francum.
Deliver this to our Lord and Emperor Charlemagne the Frank. No one but he must see. The words with his eyes only. At once.
Sorcery is this? A spell? I am bewitched. If this was meant for Charlemagne, then what will become of him? I have to warn him of this treachery.
Hit by this very potent spell of ancient magic, Anthony is going to have a hard time. His body is afflicted with what's basically destined to turn him into a dead man or a zombie over time. One would think that under such an affliction, many men would have simply given up on trying to rescue Charlemagne and turned priority to rescuing themselves, looking if by some means they might find some kind of antidote or some sort of counterspell to cleanse their body of whatever this affliction was that was eating them away. But Anthony wastes no time thinking about himself. He doesn't even think it anything to save his own life, but he puts everything on the line to save Charlemagne. And so he endures the terrors of the monastery, non-stop hordes of shambling corpses and the undead, the dimensional trappers. He engages with this terrifying corrupted monk and makes sort of the main battle with him in order to obtain the key to open the door behind which he can find Charlemagne.
So, you have come to return my book. Very well then. For your efforts, I promise a quick and merciful death.
Anthony endures fight after fight, trial after trial. Meanwhile, this terrifying and horrible spell that's been cast upon him continues to eat away at his flesh and to reduce the strength of his bones. Strengthening his resolve and resisting the great pain of this tormentive spell that's been unleashed upon him, he presses forward, enduring yet more battles, making his way towards Charlemagne, but all for the sake of what ends in tragedy.
Centuries ago, as is the fate of this world. Despite your faith, there is little to save you from the power of Salamandra.
However, Anthony's final appearance would not be in this cinematic. Actually, many years later, hundreds of years later, we get to play as none other than Paul Luther, who actually revisits the same monastery, or the same cathedral, if you will. And in an unlikely series of events, he encounters Anthony. What is probably 600 years later or more, Anthony's reanimated corpse still lingers, still remains, reinvigorated by this one sole mission, this one objective that torments his soul, that binds his spirit to this decayed, broken body, to rescue Charlemagne from harm. Long after Charlemagne had already died, already passed away, his mission failed. His body, still moved by this ironclad will of his to rescue Charlemagne, engages with Paul Luther in battle, mindlessly fleeing about, long since no longer being able to identify a friend from a foe. And so Paul Luther fights against the decrepit remains of Anthony. The battle is long and hard fought, but after an extended period exchanging blows, he is finally able to deliver a crushing blow to Anthony, falling him to the ground. Now Paul Luther, having finally put a stop to Anthony and ending the torment of his soul, he kneels down beside Anthony with his staff and prays, and he's given insight into the sufferings of our dear Anthony. For me personally, I found Anthony to be a very moving character, mostly by virtue of the fact that all these hundreds of years later, his decayed and reanimated corpse still bound by this will and this desire of his to rescue Charlemagne. This heartbreaking story was really engaging emotionally because he speaks as a character of a certain level of purity. His self-sacrifice and his will to rescue someone else stands apart from very many other stories. That indomitable will that kept him moving even as a shambling corpse. Few characters could compare to this.